Watch this when you're tired of life. Sartre's philosophy. Have you ever felt tired of being yourself? As if you were trapped in a version of yourself that keeps making the same mistakes, facing the same frustrations, and despite all efforts, nothing really changes. It's that kind of exhaustion that goes beyond the physical, that doesn't disappear with a good night's sleep or a weekend break. It's a weariness of the soul, of existence itself. Maybe you look at yourself in the mirror and think, it wasn't supposed to be like this. As if somehow you were living the wrong life, carrying the weight of expectations, comparisons, and a routine that crushes you day by day. Have you ever wondered if there's something more than this, something you haven't yet seen? The truth is, many of us get lost in the demands of life. We live to please others, to meet social expectations, while we forget who we truly are. And the more we try to fit in, the more we feel like imposters in our own body and mind. But what if I told you that there's a way to break this cycle, a way to ease that burden and rediscover a version of yourself that isn't trapped by these masks and roles that society forces us to wear? Today, I want to share with you a philosophical idea that completely changed my perspective on who I am, and it can do the same for you. On this journey, we will question what is real, what is the self, and how we can use this understanding to transform our existential fatigue into a new sense of purpose. Maybe what you're looking for isn't to escape who you are, but to reconnect with something much deeper, something that transcends this self, you know. So, if you're ready to dive into this reflection and find a new way to face life, let's start this conversation. Because the key to the relief you seek may be much closer than you imagine, and perhaps that's where it all begins, in the mirror, where you realize that it's not just the world that's tiring you, but an internal disconnection that goes far beyond appearances. This exhaustion that seems impossible to explain reveals something important about our relationship with ourselves. It's not just physical tiredness, but the weight of living with a self that doesn't seem to evolve. This feeling of deep exhaustion doesn't just come from the routine's repetitions, but from the fact that we're often stuck in a version of ourselves that no longer makes sense. The external routine, no matter how exhausting, is merely a reflection of what's happening internally. And here's the crucial point. It's not just the world around us that has become predictable, but we ourselves. We wake up, follow the same patterns, make the same mistakes, and end up asking ourselves if this cycle ever ends. And more than that, we start to wonder, am I on the right path? Is this the person I should be? This is the fatigue of identity, the feeling of living a life that no longer seems to be yours. The true exhaustion comes when we find ourselves trapped by our past failures, as if each mistake were a brick building a version of ourselves that we can't break free from. At the same time, we feel we aren't fulfilling the promises we made to ourselves. That idea of who we wanted to be drifts further and further away. But what if the problem isn't just in what we do, but in what we believe ourselves to be? What if our identity, this sense of self, is caught in cycles we can learn to let go of? When we begin to question who we really are, we open space to understand that existential fatigue can be a door to something greater, a reconnection with a more authentic version of ourselves. And when we finally realize that we are trapped in a cycle, the big question arises, who are we really? If this version we project to the world seems so exhausted and distant from the truth, maybe it's time to look more closely at our own identity. What is real in us, and what has been shaped by external expectations? From the moment we're born, we are shaped by the environment around us. Family, friends, school, culture, and even the media start building layers over who we are. These layers are based on expectations, social values, and even constant comparisons with others. Each of these influences helps form what we call the ego, a mental image we adopt to interact with the world. The ego is a construct, something that seems solid and real, but is actually an illusion. This illusion can be incredibly powerful. It determines how we see the world, and more importantly, how we see ourselves within that world. The problem with the ego is that it's not fixed. It changes according to situations. At one moment we may feel confident and successful, and in the next we may feel insecure and defeated, all because our ego is based on external factors, and those factors are volatile by nature. To better understand the nature of the ego, philosophers like Descartes and Sartre deeply questioned who we are. Descartes, for example, believed that thought was what proved our existence. I think, therefore I am, suggesting that there's a part of us that is undeniably real and conscious. However, Descartes also acknowledged that much of what we perceive in the outside world could be an illusion. Thus, he placed great emphasis on the I that thinks as the only thing we can truly assert with certainty. But Sartre, many centuries later, took this reflection a step further. He suggested that if the self we know is merely what the mind is creating, then this self is not the true center of our existence. For Sartre, the self we imagine, the face we visualize, the name we carry, the story we tell ourselves, is just an idea. This idea is shaped and influenced by the circumstances around us, but it's limited because our mind is always filtering and interpreting what we experience. Here's a fundamental point. What we call the ego is actually a response to the stimuli and pressures we've received since early on. Sartre used the term transcendence to explain that just as a banana isn't just what we see with our eyes, it's much more, something that transcends its physical appearance. Our true self transcends the mind. It's beyond these mental constructs. The mind, in its effort to simplify and categorize the world, creates the ego. But this ego is limited and does not reflect the totality of who we are. The true essence, the genuine self, is the consciousness that observes the ego. It's the part of us that is present when we reflect, that feels and perceives without judgment or expectations. Sartre argued that this consciousness isn't something we can easily define because it's not a thing, but an absence, a space where everything happens. He compared consciousness to a hole in a sheet of paper. It's invisible but fundamental. It's what allows us to experience reality without being distorted by the layers of beliefs, fears, and desires the ego accumulates throughout life. And it's this difference between the ego and consciousness that offers true liberation. When we understand that the ego is just a mental construct, a mask we wear to protect and adapt to the world, we can begin to detach from it. We can see that the exhaustion and dissatisfaction we often feel come from this constant attempt to satisfy the ego, to meet the expectations it creates. On the other hand, when we reconnect with pure consciousness, we start living more authentically. It's like taking off a lens that distorts reality and seeing the world clearly for the first time. This clarity allows us to live in the present, to free ourselves from the past and external pressures, and to reconnect with what truly matters. When we understand this difference between the ego and the true self, life begins to change. What once seemed like an endless cycle of expectations, comparisons, and failures transforms into a journey of self-discovery. Instead of clinging to the layers of identity we've created, we can explore the true nature of our consciousness and from there live with more lightness and purpose. If you're ready for this change in your life, come along and comment below, "I'm ready for change." If the ego is an illusion, a mental construct, what remains when we strip away its layers? What is this consciousness that remains, and how does it shape the way we see and experience the world? To answer this, we need to understand the relationship between our consciousness and the reality around us. Consciousness is the filter through which we see the world. It doesn't just passively receive information. It also interprets and recreates reality, shaping everything we perceive. At every moment, our mind is actively organizing and giving meaning to the things we experience, from the sensation of a touch to the sound of music or the sight of a landscape. But here's the question: are we seeing and feeling reality itself, or just a mental representation of it? Sartre helps us explore this idea with the concept of transcendence. He suggests that reality itself is always beyond what we can directly access. Just as a flashlight illuminates only part of the space it's directed at, our consciousness illuminates only fragments of the world. What we perceive are simplifications and representations of what's really there, never the complete reality. Imagine you're holding a banana. You can see it, feel its weight, and even smell its aroma, but still, you're not accessing the totality of that banana. On a microscopic level, there are invisible layers that escape our perception. Colonies of bacteria on the surface, moving particles, atomic structures. On a macroscopic level, the banana you see today is not the same tomorrow, as it changes over time, ripening or decaying. The reality of the banana transcends its immediate appearance. This applies to everything in the universe. Our mind, with its limitations, creates a simplified version of reality, a kind of map of the world that allows us to navigate it. But just as a map is never the complete territory, our perceptions never reveal the totality of reality. What we access are representations, not the essence of what's around us. This difference between objective reality and the representations we create of it occurs because our consciousness, while powerful, is limited. It acts like a flashlight that illuminates only fragments of what exists. When we perceive a flower, for example, we see its color, its shape, we smell its fragrance, but we don't perceive the internal complexity of its cells, its chemical interactions, or its connection to the larger ecosystem. Our mind simplifies all of this into a mental image of a flower. Sartre reminds us that our very consciousness operates in this way. It transforms what is transcendent, that is, what is beyond our direct perception, into mental objects we can rely on to interpret and live in the world. The rainbow you see in the sky isn't exactly the rainbow that exists outside your mind. It's a representation created by your consciousness from the light your eyes capture and your brain processes. This process happens so quickly that we barely notice. But it's important to remember that this objective reality we're trying to access is always beyond what we can fully comprehend. And this distance between what is and what we perceive is what often generates confusion, anxiety, and even suffering. After all, we're always dealing with a reduced and incomplete version of what's around us. Understanding this relationship between consciousness and reality allows us to realize that many of our anxieties are the result of this limitation. We see the world but don't fully understand it. And we often build our lives based on incomplete versions of reality. We judge others and ourselves based on limited perceptions without considering the transcendence of everything that is. By accepting that our consciousness is a powerful but also limited tool, we can start living more lightly. We can accept that we don't need to have all the answers or understand everything completely. The real power lies in observing, perceiving, and reconnecting with the present moment, knowing that there's always something more beyond what we see. This understanding also frees us from trying to control the world around us. If reality is much larger than what we can perceive, trying to dominate it or predict everything is an impossible task. Instead, we can use consciousness as an ally, a flashlight that guides us, but also reminds us that there's much more happening in the universe than what's directly within our reach. We understand that our consciousness shapes and simplifies reality, but this perception doesn't occur only on the individual level. Throughout life, we are influenced by external forces that shape how we see ourselves and how we present ourselves to the world. And here comes the idea of persona, the social mask we adopt, whether consciously or not, to navigate society. The concept of the self we build doesn't arise from a void. From childhood, we are constantly shaped by family, cultural, and social expectations. We learn early on to adapt to the norms and standards that surround us. Who you are as a child, colleague, friend, or partner is largely a reflection of these expectations, and this is what we call persona, the mask we use to integrate into the social theater. This idea of persona comes from Greek theater, where actors used masks to represent different roles. In real life, the persona works the same way. It's the face we choose to show the world, the socially acceptable version of ourselves that adjusts to codes of behavior. When you behave one way at work and completely differently at home, this is an example of how the persona can change depending on the context. The question is, to what extent does this self we socially project reflect who we truly are? Most of us aren't always aware of the layers of expectations we've built upon our true self. And this is where many start to feel the weight of existential fatigue. Maintaining the persona according to society's expectations can be exhausting because it means constantly playing a role, often at odds with our true being. Society sets norms and codes about how we should behave, how we should dress, what we should achieve, and even how we should think. From a young age, we are taught to follow these scripts. Boys wear blue, girls wear pink. Success is synonymous with money and power. And so gradually, our social self begins to solidify around these ideas, shaping what we project to the outside world. But in the attempt to meet these expectations, we often disconnect from our authentic self. Instead of being guided by our true passions, desires, and essence, we follow a script already written by culture, family, or the environment we grew up in. This process can be so subtle that we hardly notice we're living according to others' expectations and not our own. From this point arises a kind of internal tension. One part of us wants to be accepted socially, while another part longs to break free from these chains. And when this tension isn't resolved, it can turn into anguish, fatigue, and even an identity crisis. The persona that was supposed to help us connect with the world ends up becoming a prison, suffocating who we really are. This conflict is evident in many moments of our lives. Think of how many times you felt the need to please someone or follow a social norm, even knowing deep down that it didn't represent your true self. The fear of rejection and the desire to be accepted make us continue to wear this mask, but over time, it can become too heavy to carry. Understanding the difference between the persona and the true self is crucial to begin alleviating this burden. The persona is necessary. It helps us live in society, build relationships, and maintain a certain harmony in social interactions. However, the problem arises when we start confusing this social mask with our true essence. When we begin to believe that the self we show the world is all we are, we lose connection with what's beyond appearances. The challenge, then, is to find a balance between the persona and the authentic self. It's not about completely abandoning the social role. After all, we live in a community and need to follow certain rules. But it's about recognizing that we are more than what society expects of us. True freedom arises when we can take off the mask when necessary, not bind ourselves to external expectations, and live in harmony with our essence, regardless of the roles we play in everyday life. When we start to realize the weight of the mask we wear to fit into social expectations, an inevitable question arises. Who are we really beyond the persona? And it's here that we often encounter a deep discomfort, an identity crisis we cannot ignore. As we struggle to fit into social norms and play our roles in life, something may break inside us. The constant attempt to meet external expectations leads us to an internal disconnection, a feeling that we're losing sight of who we truly are. And when life seems to demand that we be something we cannot, a profound dissatisfaction emerges. This identity crisis occurs when the individual, in trying to fit into a mold that doesn't belong to them, realizes that they can't maintain coherence between what they are inside and what they project outside. It's as if the two versions of oneself, the public version molded by others' expectations, and the private version that reflects their deepest feelings and desires, are in constant conflict. And when this conflict is unresolved, it leads to a growing sense of alienation and exhaustion. Franz Kafka captured this feeling perfectly in his work, The Metamorphosis. In the story, the protagonist, Gregor Samsa, wakes up one day transformed into a giant insect. This physical transformation is a powerful metaphor for the disconnection he already felt emotionally. Gregor was trapped in a life where his worth was measured only by his ability to work and support the family. By seeing himself as an insect, he expresses how he felt inside, invisible, insignificant, alienated from everyone around him. This comparison to Kafka's The Metamorphosis is crucial to understanding the identity crisis. Just like Gregor, many people live an existence where their internal needs are repressed in favor of a socially acceptable image. This creates a sense that something inside us is wrong or misplaced. But unlike Gregor, this internal alienation doesn't have to be a final sentence. What the identity crisis reveals is a disconnection between what society asks us to be and what we know we are inside. This conflict generates an internal dissatisfaction that isn't just emotional, but also existential. It's the kind of exhaustion that cannot be resolved with simple external changes, like switching jobs or starting a new hobby. Because the problem isn't just in the environment, but within us. It's in this crisis that we often find a breaking point. The internal dissatisfaction grows so much that we are forced to re-evaluate the life we're living. The question that arises at this moment is, am I living according to what others expect of me, or according to who I really am? This is the first step to transforming the identity crisis into a path of self-discovery. The internal dissatisfaction may be a sign that we're ready to stop playing roles that don't reflect our truth and start seeking a life more aligned with our essence. The discomfort we feel when we don't fit into social expectations, contrary to what it may seem, isn't a personal failure. It's a call to authenticity. When Gregor transforms into an insect, he finally gives up fighting against society's impossible expectations. And though his story ends tragically, his transformation makes us reflect on the need to accept who we truly are, even if that puts us at odds with the world around us. The identity crisis, though painful, can be the turning point that leads us to re-evaluate our choices, our values, and the role we play in life. Instead of trying to fit into molds that leave us exhausted and alienated, we can begin to chart a path of internal reconciliation, a path where the person we are inside finally aligns with the person we show to the world. When this identity crisis sets in, it often manifests in an insidious way, through perfectionism. In an attempt to fill the void left by internal disconnection, we relentlessly seek to achieve impossible standards. And here, perfectionism becomes a trap. In a society obsessed with standards of success and perfection, many of us fall into the perfectionism trap. We're pressured to appear flawless, to never fail, to maintain a constant image of success. This not only drains our energy, but leads us to a superficial life where everything revolves around pleasing others and achieving an illusory perfection. Perfectionism is, in essence, a form of control, a way to avoid criticism, rejection, or the feeling of not being enough. For many, this stems from social comparison. We constantly look around and see people who seem happier, more accomplished, more successful. And instead of accepting our own imperfections, we begin to measure our self-esteem by others' standards. However, this pursuit of perfection is self-destructive. It demands that we're always in control, always ready to please and adapt. Life becomes an endless marathon, and no matter how hard we run, it never seems enough. We try to control every aspect of our lives, from our appearance to our work performance, but we end up just exhausted, unable to meet the demands we place on ourselves. Over time, this pressure to live up to expectations, whether from colleagues, family, or even people we barely know on social media, disconnects us even more from who we are. Life becomes a series of carefully calculated masks, leaving no room for authenticity. And the cost of this perfectionism is high: anxiety, extreme exhaustion, and the constant feeling of failure, even when everything seems to be under control. Perfectionism robs us of the freedom to be human, to make mistakes, to learn from them, and to grow. Social comparison is the fuel that feeds this endless race, forcing us to look at others and measure our worth by criteria that, in reality, have no relevance to our genuine happiness. The truth is that perfection doesn't exist, and trying to achieve it only pushes us into a spiral of frustration and fatigue. To escape this trap, we must redirect our focus, abandon the need to please others, and instead seek the acceptance of our flaws as part of the growth process. When we let go of the idea of perfection, we begin to live with more lightness and authenticity, accepting that being imperfect is what makes us truly human. As we free ourselves from the prison of perfectionism and social comparison, an essential question arises: who are we if not this persona we've built throughout life? And more importantly, how can we learn to accept and love who we really are? After so much reflection on the ego, perfectionism, and how we shape ourselves to please others, we reach a breaking point: the need to rebuild our self-image. And this reconstruction begins with a deep understanding of who we are, beyond the superficial layers of ego and persona. The concept of self-love, often misunderstood, goes far beyond simply liking who we are in the mirror. It's rooted in something deeper: the acceptance of our conscious essence, that part of us that exists beyond social masks and the ego. This love isn't conditioned by achievements, appearances, or external validation. It blossoms from present consciousness, the simple yet powerful realization that in this very moment, we are enough. This process of reconstruction begins when we stop identifying with the expectations imposed by society and start seeing consciousness as the true core of our being. Unlike the ego, which is driven by desires for validation and fear of rejection, consciousness exists free from these conditionings. It simply is, without needing to be something or someone for others. Loving this present consciousness is recognizing that we are more than our mistakes, successes, or failures. It's understanding that our true nature isn't defined by external pressures, but by our ability to be present in our own lives, to be witnesses to our emotions, thoughts, and actions without fully identifying with them. This transformation of self-image isn't an instant process. It requires practice, patience, and often the overcoming of years of self-destructive beliefs. But by starting to focus on the self that is present now, without the noise of the past or the worries of the future, we open space for true self-love, the kind that doesn't seek perfection, but rather authenticity. Loving oneself is then an act of compassion for who we are in this moment. It's recognizing our humanity with all its flaws and still accepting that no matter how imperfect we are, we have value. When we free ourselves from the tyranny of the ego and persona, when we stop measuring ourselves by external standards, we begin to live fully present in the now, This self-love, rooted in consciousness, frees us from the chains of social self-image and allows us to see the world and ourselves with more clarity and acceptance. And thus, the true transformation begins, not by trying to be more or different, but simply by being who we already are, with all the fullness that presence in the moment brings. When we finally free ourselves from the layers of expectations and the weight of the ego, a new perspective emerges. What once seemed like insurmountable fatigue, a weariness of life, reveals itself as an invitation to something simpler and truer, the present. At the end of all this journey of questioning, reflection, and search for meaning, we come to an unexpected conclusion. The existential fatigue we've carried for so long may not be a sign of failure or defeat, but a call to a more genuine way of living, an invitation to set aside the incessant pursuit of external validation, status, and approval, and return to what truly matters, the simplicity of being. This idea of living in the present may seem simple at first glance, but it's precisely in its simplicity that the true power lies. In modern society, we are constantly bombarded with stimuli that pull us away from the now. Comparisons on social media, pressures for success, the constant pursuit of more. All of this pulls us out of the present, launching us into cycles of anxiety and dissatisfaction. But the simplicity of existence is precisely the opposite. It doesn't demand that we be perfect, productive, or admired. It invites us to simply be, to accept the moment as it is, without resistance, without trying to change or control it. And in that space of acceptance, we find true inner peace. Existential fatigue is often the result of trying to be everything to everyone all the time. It's the exhaustion of living with masks, of meeting expectations that don't always resonate with our true essence. By abandoning this incessant pursuit, we make room for something lighter, more authentic, life as it is in the present moment. Accepting the present means embracing both the joys and difficulties of life without trying to escape or modify what is beyond our control. This acceptance isn't resignation, but a form of freedom. When we stop fighting against the natural flow of things, we begin to see the beauty in the small things, in the subtleties of everyday life, in genuine connections, and in simple experiences. The simplicity of existence allows us to rediscover our connection with the world, and more importantly, with ourselves. When we let go of external distractions and the demands to be something we are not, we can finally be at peace with who we are now. We can reconnect with our essence, free from the pressures of the ego, comparisons, and illusions that kept us away from ourselves. Living in the present is, therefore, an act of courage and wisdom. It's a choice to leave the past behind, to stop worrying about the future, and to simply be, with acceptance, with compassion, and with a deep inner peace. At the end of this whole journey, we realize that existential fatigue isn't an enemy to be fought, but a warning. It shows us that we're living far from our essence, trapped in external expectations and the constant pursuit of validation. But when we start to simplify, to abandon these masks, and to accept the reality of the present moment, we find something extraordinary: inner peace. Living genuinely doesn't require great external transformations, but a simple and profound internal realignment. It's accepting that being you, exactly as you are now, is enough. Life, with all its imperfections and challenges, is lighter when we let go of the pursuit of perfection and learn to simply be. If this reflection made sense to you, don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. That way, you support the channel and stay up to date with new ideas that can help you live with more lightness and authenticity. See you next time.